Welcome back to the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. Join me along with industry leaders and friends on a quest to get more people through the gym door and eating and living healthier. Join me where evidence meets empathy while rejecting fitness industry fads and extremism. Let's begin. Stan Efferding. This one is one of those long overdue ones. First met you in 2019. I'll tell the story, but I got to intro you first. So you're an iconic IFBB Pro. You are the world's strongest bodybuilder, right? You're also a high-level competitive powerlifter as well. You're the founder of the Vertical Diet, and you work with a lot of high-performance and everyday people. You've worked with Hafthor Bjornsson, and it's a really big honor to have you on the show. Now, as I said, I met you in 2019. So here I am, a slightly younger coach going and attending these fitness conferences, and I'm at the Kansas City Fitness Summit. And I'm looking around, and this is half joking, but I'm looking around and thinking, oh, geez, I'm the biggest guy here, right? You know, there's all these other coaches. And I look at a couple rows behind me is sitting quietly, taking notes, soaking in all the talks, being the eternal student is Stan Efferding. So I laugh and I go, no, I'm not the biggest guy here. It's great to have you on.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it. I remember it well. I've learned a lot along the way from some great minds in the industry. So it's a pleasure to be there.
And it shows, and this is why I want to bring you on. So people might think I was going to go into your history of powerlifting, and I just had Matt Wenning on. No. You actually do a really great job with the evidence-based, everyday nutrition, lifestyle stuff. So this is broad, but let's open the door to why do we have the obesity and metabolic health crisis? What's going on?
Yeah, boy, I tell you, people kind of get a little upset when I mention this, but it's energy toxicity. We are over-consuming calories. And there's a host of reasons why that happens, and I'm not blaming the individual. There are some genetic components to it. But at the end of the day, it does boil down to calories. I know that's oversimplistic, but we're eating significantly more calories than we did in 1970. And we're in this, to maybe take one more step down this road as we peel back the onion on this, is that we're in this obesogenic environment where we are now introduced to highly processed, ultra palatable, calorie dense foods that are very affordable and very available. And we're simply over consuming them. We know from Kevin Hall's research that there is some sort of mechanism whereby these foods tend to bypass our normal satiety signals, our ghrelin and leptin signals, our hormonal signals, and thereby causing us, when consuming these foods, to eat around 500 more calories a day. And around 70% of the foods on average that the population consumes currently is these foods. And it's not just fats, not just sugars. It's an umami. It's a blend of fat, sugar, and salt. Think ice cream, think pastries and cookies and all those kinds of delicious things that we tend to overconsume in combination, not just the cheeseburgers, but the soda that goes with them. And it's just the whole meal lends itself to overconsumption. And, I'll let you dive in there on that, but that's the nuts and bolts of it to start with.
This episode is brought to you by Renaissance Periodization and the RP Hypertrophy app. RP is the industry leader in muscle building, coaching, and education. And this app is like having a coach in your pocket. It gives you everything you need, including training programs, form videos. It gives you all your sets, reps, and weights, so you just show up and follow the plan. It adjusts each week based off your progress. And the app was created by Dr. Mike Israetel, Nick Shaw, and the team at RP, who I've known for many years. And the entire team are incredible people who've always been supportive and generous with me, so I know their character and are easy to endorse. My library contains several RP books, and I've used RP training principles in my workouts and coaching with my clients for many years, long before the explosion in popularity of their YouTube channel, which is worth checking out. RP is the first sponsor I felt remotely comfortable endorsing after over 7 years of podcasting. And if hiring a one-on-one coach isn't for you, using the RP Hypertrophy app is the next best thing to maximize your gains and take the guesswork out of your program. And there's a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can try it risk-free. If you don't like it, they'll give you your money back. And I've also got a serious discount for you of up to $50 US. Go to rpstrength.com/coats and use the code COATSRP, or go to the link below in the show notes, and that's rpstrength.com/coats. Use the code COATSRP. Let's do the ultra processed foods first, because we certainly have smart and evidence-based people who will say, ultra processed foods do not cause obesity. And I think they're technically right, but practically wrong. And this is something I borrowed from. And I listened to an episode a couple of years ago. You were on Modern Wisdom, Chris Williams. It was a podcast I really enjoy. And I think you did a wonderful job talking about these topics. And I took some notes from it. So what are your thoughts about the nuance of the role of ultra processed foods?
Yeah, I like to say that move more, eat less is or truthful, but not useful. And as I just mentioned in the prelude there, that it seems as though I'm blaming the individual because ultimately, I hate to say it's within their control, but it's their responsibility to recognize that these types of foods aren't going to satiate them. There is a genetic component for leptin resistance and ghrelin release, where some people have a predisposition to not feel as full as fast. And these foods have, you say that genetics loads the gun and then these foods pull the trigger. These foods are just simply harder to get satiated with. And at the end of the day, that's the primary reason that people fail on diets, is that they experience hunger and they're unable to stop consuming. They just think about food all the time. You've heard the term food noise is really big right now in the industry. And I know that there's a lot of people out there, myself included, who haven't fallen victim to overconsumption of foods for whatever reason.
You just turned it all into muscle, Stan. You just turned it all into muscle. This episode is brought to you by KNKG, my favorite gym bag brand, and now my favorite backpack for travel. I used to travel like an amateur and check suitcase. This meant hassle checking in, waiting for luggage, and stress over whether my bag would make it to my destination with me. Even my roller carry-on didn't allow for versatility once I got to my destination. And I travel more than ever, and I need quality, durability, and convenience. And when I met up with friends at fitness conferences, I noticed many traveled just with a backpack. So I started researching backpacks and brands. And I kept coming back to KNKG because I've had one of their duffel bags for years. So I bought their Edge backpack, and it goes everywhere with me. And my KNKG backpacks, plural, now I have two of them, the Edge and the Conquer backpack, double as perfect travel bags for a week of travel or everyday gym use. And I can save you 15% on yours. Go to www.knkg.com/Andrew59676. That's www.knkg.com/Andrew59676, or go to the link in the show notes.
Well, I was one of those skinny kids that could, eat whatever he wanted and not gain weight. The evidence suggests that those folks tend to eat whatever they wanted, but they probably didn't eat as much in one sitting, or possibly not as often, because they weren't thinking about food all the time. And we know this to be true. The evidence is clear now as a result of the introduction of those new GLP-1 agonists, the Wegovy and Ozempic, and the second evolution of those is the GLP-1 GIPs, the tirzepatide, Zepbound. And there's a third evolution coming with the retatrutide that has a glucagon effect as well. So we know that from the consumption of these new medications that it eliminates food noise, and people lose from 17 to 23% of their body weight and are able to sustain that so long as they continue the medication. For the studies have shown for as long as 2 years, whereas the comparator group could only maintain a 2% weight loss over 2 years on average. The intervention group using those medications maintained 17 to 23% weight loss, which 2% is not nothing, but it's not significant enough to impart a health benefit. You need about a 5 to 7% weight loss to really start to see some reductions in HA1C, blood pressure, lipids, and you need a 15% weight loss to reverse type 2 diabetes. So you don't have to be skinny, but a 300-pound person, if they want to reverse type 2 diabetes, needs to lose 45 pounds. And that's, you and I are sitting here thinking, hey, that's not insurmountable for you or I, or the people that might listen to our podcasts. But looking out at the general population, and understanding what this food environment looks like and what their predisposition is, that's very difficult. And I saw a great, I'm going to forget who the poster is, but it's a real popular Instagram poster, was telling a story, one I told many years ago, about how I have empathy for people who suffer from food noise, just empathy, because I've experienced that many times in my life, because I would diet down to single digit body fat to compete in bodybuilding. And so I would restrict calories and I would endeavor to get down, as low as I could. At some point, the only thing you think about from the time you wake up till the time you go to bed, and even while you're sleeping, because you dream about it, is food. And I had experienced that. And when this individual was presenting this information, he was actually talking to his sister. I think it was B.D. Carpenter, I want to say. He was actually talking to his sister, and his sister had suffered from being overweight or obese throughout most of her life. And she was sitting there listening and nodding attentively because it was his sister. And he's like, yeah, all I could think about was food and blah, blah, blah. And of course, this was for a very short period of time because we were prepping for a bodybuilding show, after which we could eat more food. And she looked at him and she goes, you just explained every day, or described every day of my life. And it was kind of emotional. It was painful to listen to, because we've all had people in our lives, my own brother and my own sister-in-law, suffer from prediabetes as a result of being overweight, and are currently on medication for that. Initially it was metformin, using a glucose monitor for high HA1C and prediabetes. But then ultimately these GLP-1 agonists, which has helped with significant weight loss. So I don't know if I blathered on too long, but it's a very serious issue, and it has multiple different variables that affect it. And so I'm extremely sympathetic. I'm not judgmental. I think willpower is a terrible, terrible way. White knuckling hunger is not a successful plan.
You just described something that my friend Dr. Crystal Guevara has talked about, and she is both a physician who prescribes Ozempic and herself a patient. She's been on as a guest, did the deep dive on these drugs, but she herself has said that was her whole experience. All she could think about, was the food noise. So for, like you said, anybody, and I don't have that kind of food noise, so we can't truly appreciate what it feels like. You have had those experiences. So for anybody who's listening who doesn't experience this, I don't think you have any idea, because I don't have any idea. You alluded to a couple things, and I've heard you say, maybe not the exact words, and I've heard this in other places, and I am of the belief this is what the evidence supports. I want you to take us further. Most of the health benefits of healthy lifestyle change are directly attributable to losing the excess body fat.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And that's not just me saying that. That's actually in the research consistently shows that 90 to 99%, and these were statistics that were quoted by the researchers themselves in the study, and numerous studies, 90 to 99% of health benefits are realized simply from weight loss itself, irrespective of diet. And I know that, I tend to be a guy that eats whole, unprocessed foods, mostly a quote unquote clean or healthy diet. I hate to use those terms. But I also recognize what the science suggests, and that even the McDonald's diet, the Twinkie diet, the 7-Eleven diet, all of which were done under, some control, monitoring the caloric intake, getting a blood test, weighing on the scale, and each of those studies, which hard to call them studies necessarily, was a control group, it was an individual. Those people lost weight. And McDonald's diet in particular lost 40 pounds over, I think it was 12 weeks was the duration of the test. And he walked 40 minutes a day, and he lost a significant amount of weight. And his blood pressure reduced, his HA1C reduced, and his lipids, his LDL-C reduced as a result of the diet itself. And he was eating McDonald's every day. Now, that part right there usually gets clipped and posted on social media because it gets a lot of attention. But what they always cut off is something that I put in my rants, my obesity rant some 8 years ago or so. What got cut off was the point where we said I would never recommend a McDonald's diet. And there's a number of reasons for that. One, because it's not satiating, so it's not going to be good for adherence long term. It may be deficient in a lot of micronutrients, probably not diverse enough in terms of fruits and vegetables and polyphenols that help with a host of different things. And I think number three, it's probably too high in saturated fats, which we now have multiple converging lines of evidence indicating that the higher your LDL for the longer is going to increase your cardiovascular disease risk. And I know that upsets keto carnivore people, but the fact is the facts. But those are obviously a number of reasons why you wouldn't do it. But it gets back to the original question was, does weight loss incur health benefits? And yes, and that's primary driver on any diet, which I think is important because some people think there's independent effects of something like intermittent fasting or, a restrictive diet, like removing, like a carnivore, or even a vegan diet. They think there's an independent effect to those diets, but there isn't. And I know there's a host of different things they try and claim, such as inflammation or blood sugars or autophagy, but none of that is supported by the evidence that is an independent effect of the fasting itself, independent of the calorie deficit resulting in the weight loss, which then results in the health.
And I can understand, let's say like a vegan is probably having a very hard time getting higher levels of saturated fat. If they're creative, they can do it. So there may be certain types of food groups or certain macronutrients like saturated fat that in certain forms may be lower, and we might get some positives there. But that answers the question really well. Do you think there's anything about ultra processed food that directly or indirectly causes, and I use the word causes, food noise or dysregulation of appetite hormones? And by the way, you mentioned ghrelin and leptin a couple of times. I'll clarify that they're the two primary appetite hormones that we have.
Yeah, ghrelin, think hunger. It's released to make you hungrier.
Hungry gremlin. Hungry gremlin. It's the way to remember. It's the hungry gremlin.
If you get a short night of sleep, that is what ultimately your ghrelin hormone will upregulate, and you'll end up being hungrier during the day. Leptin is your satiety hormone. When you get a leptin signal, it's your stomach, whether through expansion of the rugae or the time at which it takes you to eat food, that sends that signal, hey, you're full. Both of those can be dysregulated either or simultaneously differentially for different people in the population. It's in most of these studies that people hear about these studies and the outcomes. Those are averages. And but there's inter-individual variances between the participants to where if you plot them out on a chart, you'll see that some people lose weight on the diet. Some people gain weight. And there's everybody in between. Some people lose a ton of weight. Some people gain a lot of weight using the same diet. And the variable is it's different. We kind of see it in hyper responders and non-responders to training or to creatine usage. The same thing applies for diets. And a lot of it is generally attributable to adherence. It's hard to track. But when people are in a controlled environment and they're only eating what you feed them under observation, which are generally short-term studies as a result, we see, pretty positive results from the calorie restriction. But there is some variation, and those hormones seem to be the primary driver of the genetic component that in the hormonal component that makes you hungry. That doesn't mean that they usurp the laws of thermodynamics. It just means that people either consume more or downregulate their non-exercise or exercise activity during the diet, in which case they end up not being in a calorie deficit. That's it. When people say calories in, calories out, it's a little more complicated than that, simply because it's an energy balance equation that you and your audience is aware consists of everything you consume, and it consists of multiple different things on the energy expenditure side, and includes your BMI or your BMR, your thermic effect of food, your non-exercise activity, and your exercise activity. And those four things can all contribute to a reduction in calorie expenditures, which can result in, weight gain or weight loss, depending on how that teeter-totter is tilting.
It's a moving target. And that's, I think, why a lot of people will make claims like, I'm in a calorie deficit, but I'm not losing weight. No, the target moved on you. That and the fact that they're probably not great, whether intentionally, unintentionally, and like tracking the actual amount of calories you're consuming. but it's a moving target.
You're 100% right. And oftentimes I get people that reach out to me and say, my client has been eating, 1,700 calories a day and they're not losing weight. And I said, look, I apply Occam's razor here. 99% of the time, they're not eating 1,700 calories. They might Monday through Thursday, and then have a sip, snack, bite, lick, here or there, and then have a binge, go out and have a couple drinks and a dinner with their wife. And by all means, they should be able to do that, but it does directly affect those calorie consumption. So that's most of the time, that's where it comes from, is on the consumption side. And the energy expenditure side is a little less, how do I use this term? Because people get upset, but that's like we like to track. You think of a pedometer, how many steps you take during the day, because people will tend to down regulate their non-exercise activity. They'll just sit more and eat more because they're tired from maybe over exercising. That's the compensation effect that often occurs when people employ these heavy duty exercise programs. When they launch a weight loss program, they go from 0 to 100 instead of going from 0 to 10 and then 10 to 20. And they get themselves into this, hey, I'm going to start jogging 5 miles a day. And then they end up getting tired and hungry and they sit more and eat more, and it's counterproductive or compensatory to their efforts. And that there's a whole body of research around that is interesting to discuss. But you certainly want to exercise for general health, for your heart and lungs, et cetera. But exercise beyond a certain point tends to not be as effective. You get diminishing returns.
I think Herman Ponzer's research is one of the leading things there. He's got a book, Burn. I need to dive into it a little more. I know some people who may think that there might be some flaws in the conclusions, but fundamentally what you said, if people are putting in a ton more effort in one place, the body's probably going to up down effort level, whether in your movement, your NEAT, or even in some cases, your internal bodily process, like reproductive function. And we see this in, obviously women who are, lose their menstrual cycles is one example amongst many, in a bit of an extreme case. So you mentioned earlier about eating clean and then kind of danced around it a bit, but you founded the Vertical Diet. And I remember when I met you in 2019, you had your book, you sent me a copy of it on email. And so tell us, what is the Vertical Diet?
Yeah, well, it's a diet program that I've been using with my clients for at least a decade. And it was kind of the compilation of everything that I had learned since college, really, because I was competing as early as 1988 in bodybuilding and had competed throughout my career. And I got a science degree and I did 2 years of post-grad in exercise science. And then I was training, I was a high school soccer coach. I was training University of Oregon athletes, football and track. And competing in bodybuilding and powerlifting for all those years. And I learned a lot of lessons along the way about bulking and dieting. So I was on both ends of the spectrum. I would bulk up to over 300 pounds to compete in powerlifting, and I would diet down to single-digit body fat to compete in bodybuilding. And I know it sounds like an exaggeration, but it's actually pretty conservative, considering that I was going back and forth every year, sometimes a couple times a year between those two different sporting events. And I've gained and lost cumulatively over 1,000 pounds throughout my career.
You're like Christian Bale alternating between the Batman movies and the fighter, where he's emaciated pretty much.
Yeah. Bulk up, diet down, bulk up, diet down. Sometimes it could be 60, 70 pounds a year, 30, 35 up, 30, 35 down. And just kind of went back and forth. But I learned a lot.
You didn't, we now know based on the research, you don't damage your metabolism doing that, especially if you're maintaining the muscle, right?
Yes, that is true. And that's an important caveat, is that the muscle seems to be the driver of the energy. Some of the metabolic loss, the BMR is mostly exercise or energy expenditure from lean mass loss. It also makes you hungrier when you lose a significant amount of muscle to your body. It kind of, and it's a sense of a defense mechanism. It wants to get that weight back. It feels starved. But I learned a lot of lessons along the way. I obviously dirty bulked back in the early 90s, and I learned that lesson. I was getting blood tests all throughout my career. Probably have over 100 blood tests, well over that now, to be honest with you. that go back sometimes on almost a monthly basis from 2008 through 2014 when I was competing, professionally. But prior to that, I had recognized things like, elevated blood pressure and NAFLD and HA1C elevation and lipid, dysregulation, LDL-C. I would see all that when I was bulking. And I was eating the pizza, pasta, pancakes, and a pint of ice cream every night before bed, and Totino's pizza with extra cheese, right before I went to bed. Anything, those big blender full of shakes with ice cream and whole milk and the banana and protein powder, anything I could do to eat as many calories as I could, to try and weigh as much as I could. We've learned now, all these many years later, that doesn't accelerate lean mass growth any more than a small deficit. And then I would, on the other end of the spectrum, I would over diet. I would over cardio. And on me specifically, I would experience a loss, decent amount of muscle tissue in my legs. Some of that may have been that I was changing to higher repetition stuff and shortening my rest periods and putting in a lot more volume. And we know that that's not optimally conducive to hypertrophy now, those shorter rest periods, less intensity. And by intensity, I mean that I was exhausting myself in the workout due to metabolite accumulation or cardiovascular limits, or even something as simple as reestablishing central nervous system between sets, or creatine phosphate. Just because I didn't give myself enough time between sets, those subsequent sets were significantly had a significant decline in repetitions or load, and that wasn't driven by muscle tissue. It was driven by all of those other things. So I wasn't really training the muscles as efficiently, but, and then I was over dieting. I was doing the restrictive diets, what I call the guru diets. I was doing the egg whites and white fish and, tilapia and broccoli and that kind of thing. I had plenty of shows I dieted for doing the extremely strict, rigid diet, and I would experience a significant loss of muscle tissue and ended up kind of thinned out at those shows. And doing that to myself and training a lot of athletes, both men and women, for competition, both on the bulking end of the scale, whether it was football linemen like, Lane Johnson from Philadelphia Eagles, or it was Hafthor Bjornsson or Brian Shaw or Mitchell Cooper, the world's strongest men. Or I was helping Nadia Wyatt get ready for the Olympia, who took third in the Olympia and second in the Arnold Classic. I learned along the way that you could do a lot of things on both ends of the spectrum to maximize performance and minimize the adverse effects. And women in particular with dieting, the adverse effects were the female triad. We'd see a cessation of the menstrual period, amenorrhea. We would see a bone mineral density loss. We would see anemia. We'd see hypothyroidism, which would result in hair loss, and a whole host of different symptoms from those strict diets. And so I introduced the vertical diet to try and remedy a lot of that. I made sure that there was dairy and there was lean meats for iron and dairy for calcium, obviously, but yogurt and specifically for the fermented products seem to be from those, the Sonnenberg trials at Stanford show a significant improvement in gut microbiome. Keeping the yolk in there for choline and biotin for skin, hair, and nails, and keeping fruit in there. Very important that women dieting tend to demonize all of those foods. They demonize red meat, they demonize dairy, they demonize fruit. They get rid of the egg yolk. They might replace it with a dollop of almond butter, but that falls well short of the micronutrient diversity that we want for those people. And so, I kind of shotgunned it there on both ends of the spectrum. But that's what the vertical diet was intended to address. And the one other key thing about the vertical diet is that myself and the vast majority of athletes that I work with and chronic dieters would often experience digestive distress, whether or not that was full-blown IBS diagnosed or just, painful and consistent distension or diarrhea, et cetera. And so I kind of leaned into the low FODMAP diet, the fermentable oligodimonosaccharides and polyols, to help people on both ends of the spectrum. It helped the women who were eating raw broccoli to understand that there was, that could be very challenging for digestion. And it helped the guys who were, overconsume or were trying to consume more calories and were depending on things like pizza and cheeseburgers and couldn't figure out why they spent most of their time on the toilet, that you could eat lower FODMAP, easier to digest, low gas foods. And I created ones that were specifically blended for texture and ease of digestion, such as the Monster Mash. I was able to get those athletes to consume more calories and hold on to more weight with less effort, I should say, because I know when I tell people that my client has to eat 6,000 calories a day, they're like, oh, I wish I could do that. It's a chore. It's a full-time job to eat 6,000 calories a day, and it gets very burdensome after a while. So I tried to make that burden easier on them. But that's both ends of what the perfect diet intended to resolve.
You mentioned FODMAPs, which is perfect. So side note back to the carnivore diet. I have a very strong theory. I've heard other people echo what I believe. I think the carnivore diet is very appealing because it's effectively an elimination diet that people just forget to bring food back in. And something in there, they're intolerant to. It's probably FODMAP, something or other, but there's something in there that just makes them not feel great. They take it all out, baby out with the bathwater. Whoa, I feel better. That's evidence that the carnivore diet is the best thing for me and everybody else. Like, forget my blood lipids and all this other sort of long-term shit that we're probably going to, stare down, kick the can down the road on that crap. But I think that's why it's appealing. So, but can you blame someone because they feel better short-term? Now, it doesn't always last. I've had clients myself who just really wanted to go down that rabbit hole, went there, and I'll always try to have an evidence-based conversation. I'll support you, but these are some of the concerns. And if you start feeling this way, let's have a conversation. So there is a strong amount of trust. Can you tell everybody a bit more about what FODMAP stuff is? Because you named the different categories. And what are some common popular foods that actually are high FODMAP that people might not even realize they feel shitty eating?
Yeah. Well, there's a host of different foods. Like garlic and onions are two of the ones that tend to have the broadest and most severe effect on some people, particularly those suffering from IBS. They're just unable to digest those, and they end up with this painful bloating in their stomach. And then cruciferous vegetables. And again, this isn't a good food, bad food conversation. This is just recognizing that some foods are a little easier to digest than others. And it kind of depends on the individual. I always say it's individualistic. It's dose dependent, how much of those foods you consume at any one time. How they're prepared matters. If you steam your broccoli soft, it's going to be easier to digest than raw broccoli. And it's cumulative in nature. Some people might be able to eat, for say, a bowl of oatmeal on Monday and feel fine, a bowl of oatmeal on Tuesday and feel fine. And then all of a sudden Wednesday, they eat the bowl of oatmeal, and a few hours later, they feel really bloated, and they wouldn't attribute that to the oatmeal because they were fine on Monday and Tuesday. But they had accumulated. The same thing would be true with something like sugar alcohols. You might be able to tolerate a particular amount, and people vary in their and the amount of that they can tolerate. But when you go over that limit, then all of a sudden you get diarrhea. And that's kind of the overfull effects that those are indigestible. So, and sugar alcohols is an example of another high FODMAP food. And there's some foods that people are allergic to that, everybody would consider to be good foods. Some people are allergic to shellfish. Some people are allergic to eggs. Some people are allergic to dairy. As I mentioned earlier, I thought dairy is fantastic. Stu Phillips at McMaster University has said that dairy has an independent benefit for BMI and performance, independent of protein, independent of calcium. So it's a dairy effect. His words, I'm quoting. It's a dairy effect. And so he recommends 3 servings a day, but now you've got people who, maybe one are allergic to have a whey allergy. And those people certainly shouldn't consume dairy, just like kids who are allergic to nuts shouldn't consume peanuts for the same reason. They're allergic. But that doesn't mean you can make a broad recommendation to the population. Same thing would be true, say, of celiac with gluten. That can wreck somebody with celiac disease, but gluten, you can't make a broad recommendation to the population. And then there are sensitivities or resistance, some sort of, if you have a dairy sensitivity, but that exists on a spectrum. Whereas you might not be able to consume, as mentioned earlier, the dose matters. And then some dairy has high, this has high lactose, whereas yogurt has lower lactose, and it has those beneficial digestive enzymes that makes it more tolerable. And then something like cheddar cheese has very little, if any, lactose, and then you have your lactose-free options. So you kind of have to, it's the problem with doing diets. I've never been able to cookie cutter a program. I had to explain all of this, and then people kind of have to navigate based on their own. When I get a client, I send them a questionnaire, and I can get one-on-one feedback, and then I can tell them specifically, give them foods to choose from that they'll probably respond best to. But it's different for different people. Some people claim that oxalates are horrible, and they are for some people with a predisposition to kidney stones. But again, you can't make a generalized recommendations. So that's the frustrating part about food science, is that it doesn't apply to everybody. And you're 100% right that people who employ a restriction diet, for whatever reason, might end up not eating the food that is causing them the problem. Therefore, as you mentioned, think that this is the best. The diet worked because of the diet, not because of what they eliminated, and thereby, proclaim that that's the best diet and everybody should consume it. That often happens. And what's interesting is you get the same testimonials. You look at if you just read the comments and testimonials under a carnivore diet, as you get under a vegan, under a paleo diet, under a low fat diet, under the vertical diet. I have thousands of testimonials from people all over the world. But that's only the people who it worked for. And then you have other sites. There's a carnivore cringe site where I think on Instagram, where a whole host of people have weighed in and said, look, this diet ruined it. And there's ways to do carnivore healthier. There's possibly a better and a worse, I'm going to say, rather than good or bad. And the same thing would be true of vegan. Oreos are vegan. So you can do a better or worse vegan diet, depending on whether or not you're including healthy foods. And in the carnivore case and the keto case is you can do a healthy keto diet. You just have to watch your LDL. And I know that there's been a lot of people proclaiming that doesn't count because all the other health markers have improved as a result of their weight loss from their diet. And so all of a sudden LDL doesn't matter. But if you're wearing your seatbelt and driving the speed limit, it still doesn't mean you should be texting while you're driving. There's multiple risk factors to cardiovascular disease. Yes, LDL is an independent risk factor, but when you add to that insulin resistance, anything that damages the endothelial lining, like high blood pressure and high iron, start adding things to that list of cardiovascular disease risk factors, and you start getting multiples of adverse effects as a result. But you can't completely, if you've fixed everything else, maybe you've reduced your overall risk, but with elevated LDL, you still have an independent risk factor. And maybe you're willing to deal with that because the diet's so good that you're just going to, let the LDL stay slightly elevated. But ultimately, like I mentioned earlier, there's multiple converging lines of evidence between epidemiology and randomized controlled trials and Mendelian randomization, genetic trials with PCSK9 inhibition that demonstrate that the higher the LDL, higher for longer, has an increase in cardiovascular disease risk. And that doesn't mean that everybody's going to die of cardiovascular disease as an elevated LDL. There's going to be, different outcomes, just like not everybody who smokes cigarettes is going to die of lung cancer. There are folks who tend to be pretty genetically predispositioned to not potentially have adverse effects. The problem when people say they feel good is that you don't feel LDL accumulation in the arteries. It's a long-term cumulative disease that manifests on average. The first symptom of elevated LDL and cardiovascular disease is a heart attack at age 65. So all the 30-year-olds out there telling me they feel great and that then trying to find something to support their bias, like the lean mass hyper responder stuff with Dave Feldman and who's that, Nick Norwitz, who funded their own study recently that turned out that it actually, there's no such thing as a lean mass hyper responder. And the people that they identified in 1 year laid down 4 times the plaque of the population of the control group. So as far as any evidence specific to lean mass hyper responders, it doesn't exist at this point. And matter of fact, it demonstrated that these were people with LDL exceeding 170. I think some of them were 300, proclaiming that because they were fit and lean otherwise, that this somehow didn't apply to them. And then they tried to change their reporting. It was a whole scandal. They flat out lied. They didn't report. When you conduct a study, you have to declare the purpose of the study. And then upon completion of the study, they didn't report the results of the actual purpose that they had originally registered the study for. And they found a whole bunch of other reasons why that LDL couldn't be attributable or didn't change. And the problem with that is that, and I talked about this on Mark Bell's podcast a year or so ago, is that saturated fat consumption as it relates to increased LDL happens on what we call a sigmoidal curve, and whereby there's an inflection point. If people are consuming, like in the Japanese cohorts, the studies show that if people are consuming 8% saturated fat and then they bring it down to 4% saturated fat, we don't see a significant difference in cardiovascular disease risk because they're below the inflection point. That's why the American Heart Association recommends keeping saturated fats under 10%. But then as you start to increase saturated fat consumption to 12%, 15, 18, 23% of calories, total calories, we see this massive increase on that inflection point, on this sigmoidal or S-shaped curve. And then what Nick Norwitz and Dave Feldman and others attempted to do was take people in the upper edge of the curve, where it was again asymptotic, who were consuming between 23% saturated fat and took them up to 27% saturated fat. And they didn't see a big difference between those people. But they all laid down 4 times the amount of plaque as those people in a normal range. And, but that's how they attempt to skew the evidence or make the claim that, that elderly people who have higher cholesterol live longer. It's reverse causality, because things like cancer and heart disease and liver disease will drive cholesterol down. So it's not the cholesterol that's helping them, the lower cholesterol that's killing them. It's the cancer that's lowering the cholesterol. They're putting the cart before the horse there, but I'm going on and on with the most common objections to the lipid heart hypothesis, which has been consistently proven over and over again. And I didn't used to believe this. And Lane Norton didn't used to believe this. And Helen Flanagan, PhD in nutrition, didn't used to believe this. And Examine.com, with 14 PhDs on their group, just as recently as a few years ago, didn't believe this. And they published research showing the lack of differentiation. But again, it was in extreme ends of the curve on that sigmoidal curve, which is why it didn't show. And once you step back and look at the reasons why, all of these people, myself, Worth Lane, PhD nutrition, Alan Flanagan from Alinea Nutrition, PhD nutrition, and then, the real experts, the lipidologists, and, have known this for 30 years and never wavered. They've been real consistent in recognizing the connection. And we made it caused claims to be made historically that were inaccurate. This is the problem, is that people are doubtful because these same people that talked about the lipid heart hypothesis said that eggs were bad because they increased cholesterol. And then we find out later, cholesterol esters in the diet aren't necessarily converted into blood cholesterol, only in about 20% of people who are hyper-responders. And dairy seems to have an exception, except for butter, because it's sure that there's a milk fat globulin membrane that appears to be protective of dairy raising LDL cholesterol. And so now you have to pull eggs out. You have to pull dairy out. You say, well, you said it was a lipid heart hypothesis. You said it was a fat or saturated fat hypothesis. And now you're saying, no, it's not this, it's not that, but it is butter, because the churning of the processing of the dairy destroyed that protective membrane. And then, people want to demonize red meat, but you find out some lean red meats, the red meats that allowed you to stay under 10% of total fats, saturated fats in the diet, were fine. That there was a very small association. But when you started mainlining butter and bacon and ribeyes, and your LDL shot through the roof, that there was no exemption. And so people kind of got upset because they wanted to eat red meat. And so they, again, to find something to confirm their bias, they lean on these irresponsible uh, study. A lot of these studies are really just what you would call narrative reviews. They're opinion pieces. They're not actually a study. They collect other studies. And I think that they're very particular about choosing the studies that are outside of that sigmoidal curve so they can get the result they want. Oh my God, I go on forever.
No, this is why this sets you loose. It's nuanced. This is great.
It's nuanced.
But this is a perfect transition into something I was going to ask, because you mentioned this again on Modern Wisdom, and I love this topic, is the blue zone stuff, the research behind blue zones, because, I certainly think there's leading claims and perhaps some cherry-picked evidence, some things that are ignored. So what's wrong with, and let's tell people what the blue zone is and what's wrong with maybe the popular interpretations.
Yeah. It's been a couple of years since I was real deep into blue zones and debunking them every chance I could get, but as best I can. And I know, in generally speaking, what the major problem is of blue zones, but it's a host of different countries throughout the world, or it might not even be a country. It might be a particular location within a country where people tend to live longer. They have centurions. They have more centurions, or centenarians. How do you call it? Because centenarians, the people who live over 100, in that population. So they tried to backtrack that, figure out, well, what are these people doing that causes them to live longer? And like you said, it seems as though they cherry picked some places. They kind of left out Iceland and Hong Kong, and they left out, a host of different areas that had pretty similar lifespans and healthy lifespans, because those people eat a lot of meat. This was kind of a vegan bias pursuit, and they were trying to demonize red meat as best they could. The biggest problem with those studies, let's start number one right off the top, is that they don't have good birth records. That's the biggest problem. And some of those places where they live the longest have the least available birth records. And what would often happen is that the son or daughter of the parents would take over their name because there was some retirement benefits to doing so. And the reason why it's become so obvious is because some of these were the poorest communities and the ones that were highest in smoking, which would both seem to be counterintuitive in terms of people living to 100. So there was a full study done on that. I forget the individual out of Australia that went through and discovered that they just couldn't verify the birth records on these people. And all of these locations, the vast majority of these locations, were locations where that was a particularly difficult thing to get. And so that's a huge confounder. And then, of course, having left out other communities that lived long and consumed red meat as well. The biggest challenge of some of those things is the healthy user bias as well. People who tend to eat more meat also tend to smoke more, drink more, weigh more, and exercise less. And
Scotland,
this is
Scotland.
Yeah.
Scotland is notorious for having just like awful. A place I'm from, Newfoundland, Eastern Canada, highest obesity rates in Canada, I think, historically, and probably still. Alcohol is definitely the national pastime or provincial pastime for that place, so on and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, see that in Russia. They have a huge alcohol problem, and they drop like flies. Their lifespan's horrendous. And so that's a big confounding variable. We get the same thing with the processed meat discussion. As much as I'm not a big fan of processed meat, lean cuts from the deli are lumped in with sausage, corned beef, hot dogs, bacon. They lump all that in there to make a recommendation for colorectal cancer and an increase in colorectal cancer for quote unquote processed meats. But people who tend to eat those kinds of foods, especially the bacon and the hot dogs, etc., tend to eat fewer fruits and vegetables. And when you incorporate fruits and vegetables into the equation, you always get lower colorectal cancer risk as a result for a host of different reasons, whether it's fiber, polyphenols, etc. It tends to mitigate any adverse effects of nitrosamines on the gut, which might be one of the defining factors for colorectal cancer. And also, even including all of those foods, and I'm not campaigning for hot dogs or bacon, but I am saying that people shouldn't be afraid of some sliced turkey or chicken from the deli meat counter, because if they're consuming a healthy diet, the increased risk in colorectal cancer went from 4% lifetime risk to 5%. So you're not talking about a huge risk anyhow. And I would argue that it was associated with the fact that they lumped in those other foods, which would also be compounded by that unhealthy user bias, is that people are eating hot dogs and corned beef hash and bacon, aren't eating fruits and vegetables, and they tend to, again, drink more, eat more, sleep way more, and exercise less. So I'm not one to demonize. There are definitely some benefits from getting fruits and vegetables in, but I hate to just blanketly demonize red meats for either of those reasons, whether it's for LDL because we have lean cuts, or whether it's for colorectal cancer because we also have, big difference between the kind of meats that are available and what the total dietary pattern looks like. And that's really important distinction to make.
Something related to this that I enjoy talking about is alcohol, and how we used to believe that there was some health benefits associated with alcohol. So then we got the big deep dive into red wines and resveratrol, if I'm saying it right. And that research seemed to go nowhere. And more recently, of course, now, people are screaming, there's no amount of alcohol that's good, which is actually technically true, like factually true. And then so you're like, oh, you should never drink it, it's poison. It's like, no, mild amounts of alcohol don't seem to have a big associated risk. There's a big point. It's kind of like what you said earlier about saturated fat, where there's this big jump once you start getting into fairly heavy drinking.
Yeah.
And what was happening was there was something else. It was the light drinking was associated with a lot of social interaction, which is incredibly good for us healthy. So that was masking and overriding the minor net negative of some alcohol. And I also suspect this sort of relates a bit to the blue zone stuff, because I think there's a couple of things going on. Certainly the Mediterranean, like the popularity of the Mediterranean diet. What was going on with the Mediterranean diet? It's not just the food you're eating. We're talking about 2-hour-long meals, eaten in a social setting, family environment, maybe with a glass of wine or two. Again, they're eating slowly across multiple courses. And these climates, because again, you said how the blue zones, they ignored Iceland and Hong Kong, but a lot of these other places are more in and around the equator, or sort of like they're warmer climates. They're probably warmer year round. And I think those populations did a lot more walking. So I think there's a lot more social stuff going on. There's a lot more walking. And sometimes it's identifying, all right, well, what's going on in this data and what's being obscured? So I don't know if you want to take anything there and run with it.
No, you hit the nail on the head. And there are some, as mentioned earlier, the Mediterranean diet does include more fruits and vegetables and olive oil, which we know that polyphenols have a really important effect, protective effect for a host of different diseases. And they do tend to eat less overall. And you described quite perfectly the fact that they don't eat a lot of, it's a lot of what they're not doing as well. They're not over drinking, and they're not consuming ultra processed, hyper palatable foods frequently throughout the day. And they're getting in more steps. And so it's a multitude of factors. It's the lifestyle and like I said earlier, the overall dietary pattern that matters.
And I understand one of the big features of your approach to the vertical diet is it reduces consumption of ultra processed foods, or probably allows for very selectively choosing the things that matter, which is a big philosophy of mine.
Yeah. And most importantly, that if you, on the bulking side of the scale, on the dieting side of the scale, I tried to be more diverse. I mentioned earlier the guru diets, it was so restrictive. I tried to be more diverse with the diet. But on the bulking end of the scale, I tried to reduce fats and saturated fats in particular. And then I'll give you a quick rundown. If I was going to differentiate, if I had a client, they were both doing the quote unquote vertical diet. One was trying to lose weight, one was trying to gain weight. Almost entirely, I focus on satiety. And I've already mentioned diversity, micronutrient quality, sufficient protein, et cetera, but it's calories. So I want to put somebody in a calorie deficit. I'm going to focus on satiety. So I love red meat. So I give these individuals steak, because just mechanically speaking, you've got to cut and chew the steak. It just takes longer to consume, which again, you get those signals for satiety about 15, 20 minutes into a meal. And they take longer to digest because it's not, ground beef. I have them eat high satiety foods like boiled potatoes and oranges. They're way up on the highest end of the satiety index, which is just a series of different studies where they asked individuals who consume certain foods how hungry they were at periods following the meal. And consistently, boiled potatoes are reported to be pretty satiating for a long period of time. I didn't say French fries. I said boiled potatoes. And then I'll have them drink a lot more fluids with meals. Just again, that expansion effect of the rugae in the stomach to send off those satiety signals, just to help them, fill up faster. And I'll have them eat oranges instead of drink oranges. So now I'm trying to bulk someone. So I flip the script here. Now I'm using ground beef instead of steak, and I'm using white rice instead of potatoes. And I'm adding in a little bit of bone broth to that for the texture. Texture is really important to recognize. Now I've got a soft, almost pre-chewed meal for the individual. And now they can just shovel that in massive quantities because they don't have to cut and chew and get more calories in a shorter period of time so that their hunger signals don't fire off before they have gotten enough calories. And then that digests a little easier because it's, again, pre-chewed. And it seems that the bone broth helps with the lining of the stomach. It's not hugely significant, but like in a hot dog eating contest, you see the contestants will dip the hot dog into water first. It's just easier in terms of not having to chew and swallow boluses of food when I'm using the ground beef and the white rice and the bone broth. The bone broth is kind of the huge reason why that food's easier to consume. And then I'll have them drink orange juice instead of eating oranges. And I know people are like, orange juice, it's sugar, but we've compared orange juice to Coca-Cola, and orange juice has a whole host of benefits where Coca-Cola does not, in terms of reducing ALT, your liver enzymes, reducing C-reactive protein, reducing HbA1c, reducing uric acid, reducing LDL. Orange juice, because of the polyphenols, which I mentioned earlier with fruits in general, have a protective effect. Now, I don't recommend somebody trying to lose weight to consume liquid calories because they're not very satiating or easy to overconsume. But somebody who's trying to gain weight, then I'm using that as a method to get. And I've also used it. Here's another fun one. You might have heard of the yogurt OJ shake. It's real popular amongst the powerlifter crew that I introduced some years ago. I use the orange juice as a vehicle to consume more yogurt because, a huge fan I am of dairy. And I think yogurt's preferable to milk because, again, it's a little easier to digest, and it's fermented food, so it's great for the microbiome. But it's kind of hard sometimes to eat a lot of yogurt because it kind of depends whether or not you can just swallow that very quickly. So I use the orange juice as a vehicle, and I put yogurt into orange juice, and I stir it up, and I might dilute it a little bit with ice water just to get the right consistency. And then drink that almost like you would drink. I mentioned earlier, I'd get these big blenders full of protein shakes with ice cream and milk. I'll have them drink that with each meal. It's one of the big things I add, secondary to taking out to reducing saturated fats as much as possible, and to increasing the kinds and to using lower FODMAP foods and softer foods that they can eat more of. I have them drink the yogurt OJ shake with each meal daily. And those are just 3 or 4 simple strategies on either end of the spectrum that lend themselves really well to what that individual's goals are.
Do you find that there's any, this would be anecdotal with your vertical diet, people who've done it, but any improvement in appetite regulation? We obviously talk about the food noise and dysregulation. And I am of the belief, I believe there's evidence to support this, that if someone consistently consumes a lot of ultra processed food, it worsens the food noise and the cravings for the stuff. So, and I've heard that if someone is successfully able to and consistently transition off a lot of ultra processed food to a lot of whole, minimally processed food, that they notice that the appetite dysregulation gets better. Now, I'm not saying, just do that instead of Ozempic for people who really struggle with this for years. But have you observed anecdotally any improvements in appetite regulation?
Yeah, and it's not even anecdote. We do have research to show that that people who consume more what we call hedonic foods, and they compared eating sugar and more sugar and more sugar and more sugar. People tended to kind of eventually just taper off in terms of their desire for more sugar. Sugar itself didn't seem to have an appetite increasing effect after a certain point. Add fats to that and a little bit of salt. Now you've got your umami, right? And you have your hyperpalatable ultra-processed food that's a blend of these things. Now that one, people would start to consume massively amounts more and crave it more because it was a combination of those things. So that is the mix, as mentioned, the ice cream and the rest of those foods that tend to have that perfect blend. Those are the ones that people overconsume. And if you consume less of those kinds of foods, you're just going to have less appetite to overeat. And we also know that increasing things like protein, lean proteins, fiber, and high satiety foods enable people to feel more satiated and have less hunger. The binging research, it's tough because I know that there is some evidence that if you completely restrict something, that people will crave it and then overconsume it when they have access to it. But I have a lot of clients who, they get a little, they say about Pringles, once you pop, you can't stop. If I offer them, it's just a small amount of a particular dessert that historically they've really enjoyed, they can't stop. They'll eat it and then want to eat more and more and more of it. And so that's a hard road. I try to employ swaps under those instances. I call swaps. You want to get those hedonic foods out of the house. You don't want them within reach. You want to create some barrier to entry where you got to get dressed, get in the car and drive to go get it. Okay. That'll greatly limit. I mean, people will sit and watch some crap on TV for a long time before they get up and walk 2 steps across the room to get the remote control. So the same thing's true of food. If it's just further away, they've done a lot of research showing if they just place the healthier or the less healthy food closer or further from an individual, that they'll eat more or less of it, if that all makes sense. And so proximity could be the house. So I want to get rid of those foods. I don't want a bunch of ice cream in the freezer, and I don't want a bunch of, chips and cookies and stuff in the cupboards, but you have to replace them with something else. And I call those swaps. And so Lane Norton loves popcorn. If you can find an ear pop. And my favorite thing is to put a little bit of salt and a little bit of cinnamon together and mix it throughout the popcorn. The kids love it. It feels like a treat to them. We go a whole different route in terms of salt, but and then instead of ice cream, yogurt and berries, blueberries, strawberries, raspberries. A pound of berries is only 120 calories. And that's a lot of berries. So you can sit there in front of Netflix and chill at night and just pound yogurt, fat-free Greek yogurt and berries with popcorn and, God forbid I'd say it, a diet soda, and be able to at least have some ammunition, at least have some weapons in your arsenal to battle what might otherwise be a time in the evening at which people tend to overconsume the most foods, most calories, to take them off of their calorie deficit. So those are strategies, and people can search out what kind of swaps work best for them, but it's important to have them available, to satisfy those moments at which you're just chilling and you're kind of hungry. And even if it's just the behavior, maybe you're not hungry, you're bored, or you've got a social situation where you have, some friends over, what have you. You have to have some sort of substitution to manage those situations.
I know some people don't like rules, but I have a personal rule for myself is no food delivery apps. I've never had them on my phone. I never will. My rule about this is the only things I'm allowed to get delivered. Well, there's 3 things. One is, this is 2 things that we had was normal to have delivered before food delivery apps. And that's 1, pizza, and 2, Chinese food. Okay. And I probably have Chinese food once or twice a year. Pizza's probably capped at once every couple of months. No problem. It fits. And then the third thing is, and it's one of my sponsors, so I'll shout them out. It's a local company called Just Bite Me Meals. And not too long ago, I started, it saves me so much time. And I've loved it. It's life-changing, where I will pre-order a week's worth of meals, have it delivered. And so guess what? And they're good. So it's in the fridge ready to go for me. But my thoughts on the food delivery app, somebody be like, well, I order healthy stuff here and there. Bullshit. You know what? People are doing that on impulse and they're ordering the higher calorie stuff, restaurant food. Not to mention, one of the tricks with restaurant food is even, if it's a quote healthier meal, we don't know what it's cooked in. And it may actually have, 20, 25% more calories than it's even listed, just because you can't reliably trust what the values they're saying. So those are my personal rules. And then once a week after a leg day, I like to go and sit and have a medium Dairy Queen Blizzard. I've got a boundary around that. I look forward to it. And because I look forward to it, then, anytime I'm like, ooh, I'm craving a little something this week. No. I'm looking forward to this. I'll have it on Saturday. There's no guilt, no shame. It definitely fits my weekly calories. And so I feel good about the collective approach to my entire week. Now, again, those are things that work for me. People can take them if they like.
Yeah. DoorDash is a killer. But by the same token, Instacart will deliver your groceries right to your door if you're short of something to eat. And it actually comes from a grocery store. I use grocery stores as my fast food stop, even when I'm traveling. I don't pull into Carl's Jr. I pull into Safeway or an Albertsons or, Bonds or whatever is your Kroger's, whatever your local store is. And I have this little list. For some reason, I can't seem to remember these things, but I have this little list in my notes app on my phone, and I walk around the store and I just grab everything I need. Now, I end up with more food than one meal, but I'm traveling, and so the rest of it, I eat subsequent meals. But I'll grab, my carb is usually I'll get a loaf of sourdough bread because you can eat that anywhere, anytime. You don't have to cook it necessarily. And I will get some deli meat for that if I want to. And I'll get some maybe a little bit of cheddar cheese. I'll get some hard-boiled eggs. I can go to the yogurt section and get some yogurts. Oftentimes these grocery stores, kind of what I like about Walmart is they also have those styrofoam coolers. So, cause I will have extra food. You can't just buy one meal. And I use that throughout the day. I keep it in my trunk. If I'm traveling, I'm in a rent-a-car and I've got events. If I don't take my meals with me, which I often, will do, I'll just take my frozen meal prep meals with me. But in the absence of that, I can stop at any grocery store and I can get hard-boiled eggs and, or maybe a deli can make a sandwich for you, but you just got to be careful not to add the mayonnaise. You just make simple little decisions like that. But yeah, I won't eat the fast food, and I can get a little OJ if I want, or an orange, maybe a little bag of baby carrots. And then I use the frozen berries as my ice pack, and I put everything into one of those little styrofoam containers and put the frozen berries in there. And I have subsequent meals. Sometimes if I'm traveling, I have to go get a little paring knife to cut the tomato if I want to have tomato, or I buy a small jar of pickles and I can make a little sandwich. Now I've got sourdough bread, I've got a deli meat, I've got some pickles and tomatoes, and I make this little sandwich that I think is delicious when I'm traveling on the road. A little slice of cheddar cheese. Shout out to Tillamook, because I was born and raised in Oregon, and Tillamook cheese is outrageously good. They make it there on the coast. But that's one of my go-tos. I make a sandwich, and usually there's, I don't know, 8 sandwiches worth of food there because you've got a loaf of sourdough bread. But I'm a big eater because I'm still, pretty decent sized guy. So I'll eat 2 sandwiches at each of the next 4 for the whole day. I'll just, I have food. I have hard-boiled eggs. That's one of my biggest go-tos. And meal prep's the big thing. We've talked a lot about the food, but, I coined the term compliance is the science many years ago. And I start there with a diet. I design a diet based on an individual's personal preferences, because it has to be part of a lifestyle that's simple, sensible, and sustainable. That's the important thing. We talk about long-term dietary adherence. And so I'll design the diet for compliance. And I tell the kind of the top 3 keys for dietary adherence. And this was studied with the Weight Control Registry. It's the largest ongoing study of successful weight loss. Over 10,000 participants who have lost more than 60 pounds and maintained the weight loss for over 5 years. 98% of them went on a diet. It's important to have a plan. 90+ percent of them increased their exercise activity, and the number one exercise was walking. 75% of them ate breakfast. Eat breakfast, don't eat breakfast, I don't care, but you don't have to skip breakfast to lose weight. And the vast majority of the people in this study do eat breakfast. It's fine. My daughter hates eating breakfast. My son loves breakfast. So I let them, manage that themselves. I personally like to eat breakfast. The whole idea of skipping breakfast to lose weight, again, no independent effect of time restriction on diets. It's personal preference.
There's
And
probably
then,
there's probably a lot of healthy user bias in the breakfast data too, I'm guessing.
possibly, yeah. And then now there's some strategies, and the number one in the research is meal prepping. And we've known this for decades because that's what all your bodybuilder, figure, physique, bikini girls have been doing for years with their little 6-pack bags and their Tupperware. They tote around with them, and you might laugh at them, but it's a highly successful habit to have. These are people who, when they open their fridge, there's a Tupperware in there with a perfectly measured calories and macros. So they're, the foods they like to eat, hopefully. Rather than, as you also mentioned, opening the fridge hungry and then making the decision what you're going to eat based on what you're hungry for, which usually results in overconsumption. Same thing would be true if you left work for lunch and were deciding if I was going to go to Subway or Dairy Queen or whatever. You're going to pick the place that the thing that the hunger is for, and you're going to overconsume it. So meal prepping is number one, and people who consistently meal prep, whether you do it yourself or you use a meal prep company, that's a very effective strategy. Number two, that which gets measured gets improved. Tracking your progress, weighing regularly. I like to weigh daily and take the average for the week to look at my comparators with progress, because there's daily fluctuations, especially for women with water retention and the menstrual period, et cetera. Even training, you'll get some inflammation, a little bit of swelling from the training stimulus, or food bulk from a high fiber water consumption. So I weigh myself daily. Hours of sleep, and some sort of app, I think, is helpful, at least initially, until you learn the calorie content of specific foods. I can't tell you how many employees I've had over the year at my businesses that would roll in there with a vanilla latte from Starbucks who were also on a diet. And I said, look, far from me but that's got 700 calories in it. They just looked at me shocked. They couldn't believe it. I'm like, yeah, it's 700 calories in that Starbucks vanilla latte.
Shout
How
out
would
to
you
my
know? Go ahead.
I was gonna say, shout out to my sponsor, Macros First, calorie tracking app. It's my favorite. So big shout out there.
Perfect.
Yep.
Find an app, use it for a while so you can see those little teeny little dips, the sauces for your chicken nuggets. Not suggesting chicken nuggets, but those little sauces and dips at fast food restaurants. Some of those could be up to 300 calories. They have 2 tablespoons of oil in them, along with the flavor. I don't think people realize that there's a lot of hidden calories, and it's not a good food, bad food conversation. When you make food with a lot of butter or a lot of oil, you're going to add a lot of calories, and those can generally be considered to be hidden calories because you don't really see them in the food that you're eating. Restaurants are notorious for cooking their food in fats. They have a lot of oil, and of course, all the deep fried stuff is going to have a ton of extra calories from the oil. So get a tracker, and I'd like to track steps. And so we weigh, that which strategy gets approved. We weigh, we use the food tracker. I record my sleep because that's hugely important for a whole host of reasons. And then I record my steps because I want to get, because you want to see if over the course of your diet, if you're not down regulating your non-exercise activity, plus steps have a satiety benefit. And we also know from the research that multiple bouts of walking a day, say 10 minutes, 3 times a day, is significantly superior to 1 30-minute bout of exercise at the end of the day. And I find it easier to comply with. And you get up in the morning, take a walk, maybe at night, and not just lunchtime, because it's shorter and it doesn't take quite the amount of effort to, so barrier entry, again, having to change, get your car, drive to the gym, slog your 30, 40 minutes on a treadmill, which we already discussed earlier, isn't terribly effective for weight loss to begin with. Your body tends to, use Herman Pontzer's compensation effects. And so those are the 4 things I like to track. So when I get a client, I make them send me that information daily. They send me hours of sleep, morning body weight, a picture of each meal. I love to do that, or their tracker information. But I like to see a picture of each meal because it helps me more visually to see whether or not that's a high satiety meal. If there's something we can improve in terms of diversity. Although it is on the tracker as well. It's just easier for me to look at the picture quickly. But it's more for their benefit than mine. It's just another thing to help, because most of my clients will tell me, I just need someone to help me keep me accountable. And obviously that's hard to do online. I'm not there. But the more I get them engaged in tracking these behaviors and then sending me the information, I can ping them if I don't get it. And then if you check in with somebody weekly, huge chance they're going to have gone off the rails or not remember what they had 2 days ago. Who does? Specifically. But if I've got pictures of the meals and then the walk counter, number 3 on that list, we talked about meal prepping. We talked about tracking. Number 3 on the list is getting a coach. And I'm not shilling for my services. A personal trainer to me at the local gym is the most important person in this journey. If you don't have a steady partner or a spouse that's supporting this effort, a personal trainer, someone with which you have an appointment, it compels you to go, who can then get you to do what you need to do rather than getting distracted on your phone or whatever. But that person who has the most contact with you, and this has been studied as well. They looked at doctors versus registered dietitians versus personal trainers, and personal trainers far and away outperform in results from diets and training than the other two. The other two being A, very expensive, and B, less interaction. It seems that the more you touch your client, the better. And so I try and touch them daily via, online stuff, but at the very least, having a trainer there with you 2 or 3 times a week helps with compliance.
And we definitely know now, there's research on this, that when people leave or drop the accountability relationship, which a coach is the most obvious example, there are other ways, then that is one of the ways that people fall back in old behaviors that lead to the weight regain, metabolic unhealth.
You're probably too young to remember the old movie, What the Bleep Do We Know? And in that old movie, it was said that people tend to do as they've always done. So don't consider yourself weak because you're not some, world-class athlete that popped out of the womb with all these genetic benefits. Because genetics do reign supreme. Just recognize that you need some help along the way, and those trainers or a good training partner. And I will say more than anything, I've said the best diet is the one you'll follow. There's many paths to the same destination. We went over all that. The best exercise is the one you'll do. I designed those programs, the 10-minute walk, for convenience, for compliance. But the same thing would be true of your weight training. If you don't enjoy it, that's why I hate these programs where some trainers bring people in, and I call it battle ropes and burpees. Nobody's doing that consistently long-term and looking forward to it. Nobody. And the trainers pride themselves because their client is sweating hard and hyperventilating and breathing. And, oh yeah, I got a great workout. Good luck with keeping that client for more than 30 or 40 days. They're not telling their friends how enjoyable that is. But that's why I always kind of resort to strength. Because it's measurable and progressible, and it gives the client wins. So they come into the gym and you set them up on a trap bar deadlift because it's got a low barrier and it's easy to learn. Anybody can do it day one. And they do a few reps there, 5 or whatever. And the next time they come in, they do more. And the next time they come in, they do more. And that keeps going for weeks and weeks and weeks, if not months. A lot of it's neural adaptation, just getting practiced at the movement, of course, and learning to recruit all the muscles together and just executing it better. And I play on that because it still gives them a win. They set a PR. Every time I get a client in the gym, I want them to set a PR, and I track all of their training that way. It doesn't have to be a 1-rep PR. It could be a 5-rep PR or a 10-rep PR. It doesn't have to be just the trap bar deadlift. It could be any of the machines in the gym. I kind of prefer machines because they just move the pin, and it restricts their movement such that it's replicable, so that it doesn't start to have a lot of variation for balance and what have you. And so they can specifically measure it against their previous week's performance. Now they're going home and bragging to their husband or their son how strong they are. And, hey, you want to arm wrestle? That to me is the kind of program that is sustainable, that people look forward to. Because some weight training does need to be incorporated into the program. 100% you have to weight train. We think cardio is important. Everybody should do that too. But you're not going to retain lean mass or help bone mineral density if you don't have some sort of resistance training. It doesn't have to be heavy. It could be any weight. Just get in and move it. And then even with respect to exercise, anything else that you decide to do, hopefully it's something you enjoy. I picked up this nasty little addiction called pickleball about a year or so. And I do it. You wouldn't catch me dead on a treadmill, but I'll go play pickleball every day.
Stan, I'm just imagining some of the random people that you show up and you play against. They're looking at this behemoth going, oh no, we're going to die playing pickleball.
Yeah. But the funniest thing is some of these 65-year-old women that were former tennis players kicked my ass. Yeah. I'm out there running all over the place. And if you know pickleball, running around, it means you're not doing very well. You should be able to control, and they control the ball really well. They're just very good. But all age groups, men, women, young, old, come join our little pickleball association here in American Samoa, where I currently live. And there'll be 20 plus people show up every night, and we play and people sit and wait and work their way in, and we play pickleball. The point being is I enjoy it. I do it consistently. And I hope, I wish for everyone out there listening and all the people that they make recommendations to, that they can find something that they enjoy that has some level of activity involved with it. You're moving around, rather than restricting people or making people think there was only one pathway. I got to jog 5 miles. Only one pathway to success, because that's certainly not the case. It could be Zumba class. It could be basketball. You could, whatever, activity you enjoy that gets you to move around, please, join a group and participate in it.
Stan Efferding, everybody. So everybody can follow you on Instagram at Stan Efferding. I always love when someone was lucky enough to get their name without having to add any bullshit like the word fitness, like I have to. Is there anything else you want to direct people to check out?
Yeah, stanefferding.com is my website. And I do have the Vertical Diet ebook on there, which is now in its 4.0 evolution over 10 years now. We continue to upgrade it and provide it for free to anybody who bought a previous version. It's now over 250 pages. It covers everything we talked about today and much, much more, with links to videos, articles, and peer-reviewed research on all these topics. Take a deeper dive and give you the evidence behind some of the claims I made today. And my co-author, very important to know, is a PhD RDN who is director of dietetics at UNLV and an instructor in their exercise phys program, uniquely qualified on all of these topics. He and I worked together for hundreds of hours on this and still collaborate today. And he lived in Las Vegas with me when we were putting this out. So that's on there, as well as scroll down and there's a blood test link. I talked about blood tests today. I encourage people to at least get a baseline. It's very comprehensive. I used to get online blood tests. I've talked about them 10 years ago. And they would cost me a lot of money. I would spend $300-400 on a test. It was kind of cost prohibitive. The current company that I work with, Merrick Health, they provide the same blood test with, if you go through the link from my site and use my discount code, $140 for a very comprehensive 5-page blood tests. And I think everybody should start with that, because then you can look at your LDL and you can look at your HA1C and you look at all these different markers, kidney and liver enzymes, et cetera, and see if there's anything that you personally need to address with diet or lifestyle preferentially. And then if necessary, medical intervention, but it's all there. And then YouTube, I talked about some videos that I made on YouTube, which, hey, it's funny because some of the videos that I made 7, 8, 9 years ago are some of the hottest topics today that I talked about in terms of obesity and all the stuff we talked about today. I had intended on going back and pulling excerpts out from those videos and putting them side by side with some of the current hot topics by some of the most popular social media people, and showing that it's almost verbatim the same stuff I've been discussing for a decade. It hasn't changed. But that's Stan Efferding on YouTube. And there's a whole host of Rhino's rants and my 10 talks from when I walk around the neighborhood, talk about certain topics. And I think they're still relevant today. I wasn't right about everything, things change over time. But it's just some fun stuff.
Hey, we can change our beliefs with the evidence. This is sort of a side little thing, but as of the time of recording, there is an individual who's notorious for just being a difficult personality, having a complete temper tantrum online over something that one of my guests said. That was a shift with the evidence, and I'm not going to say specifics. And it's like, yeah, imagine that someone who is evidence-based, dare shift beliefs as evidence changes. Good Lord. That's what I respect about people, but it does feel nice then current evidence validates something that someone was also ahead on, like you described. So everybody, A, I want you guys to go follow Stan. B, Stan, hopefully I'll see you again. I think the last time we saw each other was we were both speaking at Aram Grigorian's first ever Real Coaches Summit in Las Vegas. That was 3 years ago, which was great. And most of all, these are the kind of episodes I'm hoping to create. So you guys help me by taking this and putting this right in the DMs, in a text message to someone in your world who you want to hear this stuff. Practical, evidence-based. This is going to change lives. The coaches listening, I know you guys are loving this. I know you're along for the ride. I appreciate you guys. I know you're probably sending this to your clients or other people in your world. So stay tuned. I've been piling up incredible guests like Stan. Stan, you will be back at some point. I promise. This was spectacular. Just thank you for coming on and talking to everybody today. I appreciate you.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you having me.